Well, I just want to welcome everyone here to Embrace. Happy Palm Sunday. My name is Adam. I'm one of the pastors here, and as always, we're so excited that you're here and truly thrilled that you are with us. And today you are in luck because we are starting up a brand new series. And with Easter coming up, we were looking for an upbeat, exciting name for this series, just an encouraging, upbeat title. And while we settled on the title this year, it's called From Death. Our title is called From Death, which is so exciting, right? I can just sense the excitement in the room. Everyone is just dying to hear this series. But seriously though, this past year in the Weber household, we actually had 2 deaths in our immediate family. One of those deaths was our chicken named Mocha, which was actually given to us by a family here at Embrace. And now that I think about it, that family's probably hearing about the death of Mocha from a message, which was maybe not the best way to hear. Anyway, so one was Mocha, and the other was our chicken named Lady. And I just gotta say, if it's okay, we actually didn't have a funeral. If it's okay if I can just say a few words, they were actually both wonderful chickens. I mean, just well-behaved. Neither of them, I kid you not, ever pecked us when we walked past us. They both laid great eggs. They were great layers. I have no idea what else you can say about a chicken. But with Mocha, we're actually not for sure that she died. Like, unless a chicken rapture of some kind happened, we just kind of assumed it because one day we came out and Mocha had disappeared. Like, she had completely disappeared, and we figured that it was a chicken hawk of some kind. But with Lady, though, one day I came out, and Lady, this white chicken, just was not looking very good. And the next day I came out, she was looking a little worse, until finally one morning I came out, and Lady had died. And when she did, I wasn't really sure what to do with Lady. It's like, what do you do with your family pet that dies? Do you bury the chicken? Do you call before you dig? Like, what do you do with this chicken? And so I kid you not, I'm sitting there with Lady, and I'm like, I don't know what to do with our family pet. And so I did what I thought was best. I said a prayer for her. No kidding, I actually prayed for Lady. Jesus, would you just take Lady? And then I laid her to rest in our family trash can. And so I laid her in the trash can, and I'm not kidding. So I'm grieving at this point. So I'm joking right now, but I was truly sad about Lady. And so I come into the house, and I was asked a question that I wasn't fully prepared to answer. You know, in those moments, you just don't know what to say. My kid said, "Hey, Dad, where did you bury Lady at?" And I was so frazzled and I was grieving. Just being confession, I lied and I said, somewhere in the backyard. And so since that time, I'm not kidding, since that time, our kids have been trying to locate where Lady was buried at. And no joke, this week, we hadn't heard about it for a while. Lady died a year ago, so it's not like last month, okay? This week, my daughter comes in and she says to my wife, she says, "Mom, I think I know where Lady was buried." And all I could think was like, unless you went to the city dump, that would be impossible. # worst parents ever, right? No, but really though, when it comes to death is one of those things that is strange to talk about. And yet, unless Jesus returns sometime soon, it's something that will have physically happen to us all, right? But for today, we're not talking about physical death. Instead, we're talking about a spiritual death, like the death of our soul, the death of our inside. I mean, internally, have you ever just felt like you're barely surviving? Ever just felt like you're anxious about everything and you struggle to sleep at night? Ever just felt like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders? Ever just felt like nothing really satisfies you? And so you just go from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. Have you ever just felt like spiritually you're dying inside of here? Well, this right here is exactly what we're going to talk about for this series. Now, at one point in the Bible, a guy named Paul is writing a letter to a group of Christians in the city of Rome. In the Bible, it's called the book of Romans. And so if you have a Bible with us today, I'd encourage us to open it up to the book of Romans. Use the Bible on your phone. Use any Bible you want and open it up to the book of Romans. But once more, Paul is writing this letter to this group of Christians, and he's explaining to them the very basics of the faith. He's explaining to them what it means to believe and what they believe as followers of Jesus. And halfway through this letter, in chapter 8, he begins to talk with them about the clear difference between living for ourselves and living for God. And he's trying to show the clear contrast, the very clear contrast when we focus on ourselves and when we focus on God. And starting in verse 5 of chapter 8, here is what Paul says. Again, Romans 8, chapter 5. People whose lives are based on selfishness think about selfish things, but people whose lives are based on the Spirit think about things that are related to the Spirit. The attitude that comes from selfishness leads to death, but the attitude that comes from the Spirit leads to life and it leads to peace. Once more, Paul is trying to explain that there are two very, very different ways that we can live. And first off, he's saying that we can live a life based on selfishness. This word can also translate to the word flesh. And he's basically saying that when we live a life based on selfishness, we live for ourselves. And we do what we want to do. And we do what we think is right. And we do what we think will make us happy. Again, when we live a life on selfishness, when we do, we think about selfish things. And we think solely about ourselves. And so Paul shares that, but then he also shares an option two, a second option, that we can live a life based on the Spirit. Basically, that we can live a life based on God. And when that happens, we do what God wants us to do. And we do what God thinks is right. And we do what God thinks is good. Again, we can live a life based on the Spirit. And when we do, we think about the Spirit and we focus not on ourselves, but we focus instead on God. Again, Paul's explaining there are two very, very different ways that we can live. And oh, by the way, this is important. Two very different ways that we can live. And oh, by the way, one of those ways leads to spiritual death, and the other leads to spiritual life. One of those ways leads to death, and the other leads to life. Okay, so that's kind of heavy, right? And that's a lot to take in, but if you're anything like me, it's like, all right, well, I'll be the first to say that I'm not an angel. I mean, I am not Jesus. I'll be the first one to say I'm not Jesus, and so I wouldn't say that, but I also wouldn't say that I'm selfish and that I live a selfish life either. Again, I'm not God, but I also wouldn't consider myself to be a selfish person, especially compared to other people. Like, I'm not nearly as bad as other people. Let me just tell you, like, my sister, she is selfish. And my coworker, he's selfish. My ex, selfish. My one friend, selfish. My mother-in-law, Jesus, please take her now, right? And with this, I'm just guessing that most of us, if not all of us, would say a very, very similar thing. I'm not Jesus. I don't want to say that, I'm not Jesus. No, please, I'm not Jesus. I'm not Jesus, but I'm also not a selfish person. Well, I hate to say this, and I hate to kind of confront us, but that is exactly what selfish people say. As human beings, our default is to be selfish. Our natural tendency is to focus on ourselves. On a daily basis, we assume and we live like the world revolves around me, myself, and I. I mean, like, have you seen yourself while driving in heavy traffic lately? You are crazy. And have you seen Facebook and Instagram anytime soon? It's all about ourselves. When we eat food or we drink coffee, for some unknown reason, we take pictures and we let people see our food and the coffee we're drinking. When we work out, we post pictures about it, right? When we get a haircut, we post pictures. When our kids do anything cute, it turns into a stressful photo op, doesn't it? With selfies in general, it's like, what in the world are we doing? Like, why would we do such a thing? And I'm not judging because I do the same exact thing, but once more, we are consumed with ourselves, and as human beings, our default, like what we naturally do, unless we're very, very intentional, is we live a life based on me. A life that is centered and is focused on ourselves. And this doesn't mean that we're horrible people. It doesn't mean that we're terrible or anything. It just means that we live for number one, ourselves. Living how we want to live, trying to manage and control our own life, putting ourselves at the center of everything instead of looking to God. And honestly, this wouldn't be that big of a deal, and it wouldn't matter all that much, and honestly, you probably could have skipped church today, except Paul tells us that living this way leads to what? It leads to death. Like the death of our soul, like the death of our inside. I mean, earlier when I asked, have you ever just felt like you're barely surviving? Ever just felt like you're anxious about everything? Ever just felt like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders? Ever just felt like nothing really satisfy you? Ever just felt like you're spiritually dead inside of here? I know for myself, it's like, yes, I have. Maybe for you, it's like, that's really the story, that's pretty much the story of my life. I mean, broken, empty, restless, never satisfied, that's me. And all of us can look so many different ways in our lives, and for some of us, it's maybe quite obvious that we're living for ourselves. And at another place in the Bible, Paul tells us that the result of living for ourselves are things like sleeping around and doing whatever feels good, and hate shows up in our lives, and we struggle with losing our temper, and we struggle with jealousy and conflict and partying. And if that's us, I just want to ask, like, how's that working out for us? If that's something you're wrestling with, like, how is that going for you? But again, though, living a life based on ourselves can look a million different ways, and it doesn't mean that we're doing anything inherently bad. It just means that we're consumed with ourselves, and we're consumed with our own agenda, and we're trying to control every little aspect of our lives, and we're secretly hoping that we get our own way in every situation, or that we get noticed. All the while, nothing ever seems to be enough. And what it all boils down to, and listen to this, what it all boils down to is that we were just never, ever, ever meant to live a life that was based and focused on ourselves. We were never, ever meant to live a life that was based on ourselves, because when we're the center of everything, it means that we do have to be in control. And no wonder why we can't sleep at night. No wonder why we're anxious, because we have to be in control, and we're terrible at being in control. And honestly, truth be told, we're actually in control of very little to start with. And when we're at the center, our worth and our identity and happiness is based off of us and how we feel about ourselves in any given moment, which only changes roughly 6,000 times a day, right? Give or take a couple thousand. And when we're at the center, we live and we do what we think is right, and we do what we think will make us happy, when truth be told, we don't have a clue. And when we live this way, it's like watching a bad car accident. We go from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, and we might find joy for a moment, and it's maybe awesome for a while, and we're actually on Facebook bragging about it. It's maybe awesome for just a little minute. We're maybe satisfied for just a couple times, only to find ourselves more empty and unsatisfied than ever before. When we're at the center, we're trying to do things out of our own strength, out of our own kindness, out of our own faithfulness, out of our own love, out of our own self-control, and it's no wonder why most days it just feels like we're barely surviving. It's no wonder why most days it feels like we're just barely hanging on, and moment to moment we could go crazy on any person that we come in contact with. Again, when we live a life based on ourselves, we focus on ourselves. And Paul tells us that this way of living leads to what? It leads to spiritual death. Just to be clear, not spiritual sickness, not spiritual cold, not like a spiritual flu, which would be bad in itself, but spiritual death. And yet thankfully, as we said earlier, Paul tells us about an option 2. But there's a second option. We're going to get to the heart of this option 2 next week, talking about life and what makes that possible. Do not miss next Sunday. Anyone looking for life here? It's like, sign me up for that, right? But for today, I just want to highlight the main difference between these 2 different ways that we can live. I just want to make it clear what the main difference is in these 2 different lifestyles that Paul is trying to show us. And the main difference is that in option 1, the first way of living, the Spirit, basically God, is not present or even mentioned. Like in option 1, God isn't even mentioned. Again, those who live a life for themselves focus on themselves. Like we're present and we're the focus and we're talked about, but God isn't. Again, in option 1, in the first way of living, God isn't present or even mentioned, but in option 2, God is not only present, but he is at the very center of it. He's not only present, he's at the very center. Those who live a life based on the Spirit, those who live a life based on God, are focused and consumed with God and everything related to him. And what does this way of living lead to? It leads to life. The opposite of death, it leads to life. Option 1, God isn't present. He's not even mentioned. He's an afterthought. He's like a tag on to the rest of our lives. And option 2, God, he's the very center. He's the foundation. He's the basis of everything. And so today I just want to ask one simple question. Today I just want to ask on a daily basis, or maybe with our lives as a whole, what is keeping us and what is holding us back from putting God, from putting Jesus at the center of everything that we are? Like what is keeping us from God? What is keeping us from putting Jesus at the center? Is it wanting to be in control? Like we're just not ready to trust God yet and follow him, and we're just not ready to hand control over to anyone, including God? Or maybe it's worry that's holding us back. And our day and our minds and our lives are so filled with worry that we can't see God. Or maybe we're worried about one specific thing, or maybe we're too busy for God. We're just too busy to open up the Bible. We're just too busy to talk with God, just with life and kids and school. We're just too busy, and we just don't have the time or room for God at this time. Or maybe we're just focused on another thing. Maybe the true God in our life isn't actually God, instead it's our job. Maybe the God that we worship is our career. Maybe the true God in our lives is relationships. It's like everything we do just revolves around our relationships. Maybe we're conservative and it's just like our God is our bank account. Like if I can just like hold control on that. Maybe it's our physical bodies. Like we're just controlled of how we look in the mirror, and we're just looking for our worth and our identity and joy from this one thing. And even though it's never, ever, ever, ever delivered in the past, maybe it will today, you know? It's like I'm just looking for my worth and my identity from this one thing. And when I get this next place, when I get this next status, this next promotion, when I lose this much more weight, when I just get to this one place, when I get, date somebody, engage, when I just get a kid finally, this one thing is finally gonna satisfy me, even though it never, ever, ever has in the past. We just run to it. Maybe we're here and we're just not ready to give up something. It's like this one thing in our private life, we just know it's not okay, and yet we're just not ready to give it up yet. Why? Because it just brings joy. It just brings peace. It's like this drug that just helps me to relax. Yes, I want to follow Jesus, but I'm just not ready to give up this thing. Or maybe it's our pride. Maybe we're here and we're just filled with pride. Pride keeps us from putting God at the center. It's like I know God is all-knowing and all-powerful in something, and yet I would never say this, but I'm actually pretty great too, And I'm actually pretty smart too, and I'm actually pretty enlightened too. And God, do you actually know how many people report to me at my job? Like, have you seen my degree and like my specific like recognitions with my degree? I'm an adult. I think I know what's best for me. Once more, what is holding us back? What's keeping us just from putting God at the very center of it all? And just to be clear, it maybe is one big thing that's holding us back, or maybe it's something completely different every day. Just like one thing every morning, there's just this one thing that just gets in the way from doing it. Also, maybe today, we're here and we just never knew that there was an option too. We just never knew that. Yes, we've heard about God before, but we just never knew that God wanted to be a part of our lives, and not just a part of our lives, but at the center of our lives. And so today, wherever we are though, maybe we're following Jesus, maybe we're not. Maybe there's a lot of things holding us back. Maybe there's one thing. Wherever we are today, I just pray that we'd ask and that we'd put God at the center of all that we are. I just pray for all of us across our campuses that we just get so sick and tired of just trying to survive. I pray we just get so tired and so sick of spiritually dying inside that today we just ask Jesus to be the center, to be our foundation, the basis of everything we do, that he'd just be everything to us. And how do we do so? Just by making it known. Just by declaring, Jesus, today, would you be the center of my life? And God, I'm so sorry that I've put so many other things at the center, but Lord, today I'm tired of trying to survive. I'm tired of just trying to get by. I'm tired of trying to be in control. I'm tired of running and trying to find wholeness, only to find more brokenness. And so to Jesus, today, I want you to be the center of my life. I want to be focused and consumed with you. Starting today, Father, I want to stop walking towards death, and I want to start walking to life. Jesus, today, would you just be my center? That would be my greatest hope, that we just get so sick of dying, that we just be like, today, Jesus, I'm going to try you. I'm even just gonna try it for a week or for a month. I'm just gonna try to focus everything on you and see what happens. Wrapping things up today, it's kind of random, but the last 3 weeks, it's been kind of crazy with this whole book thing. If you don't know, it's the weirdest thing ever. I wrote a book, and some people are reading it, which is awesome, but it's been amazing just to see God use it. People from honestly around the world have been taking pictures of them reading the book and sending tweets to me, but the added focus on myself has honestly driven me a little nutty, to be just totally candid. I hate being the center of attention, which makes being right here every week not always the easiest process for me, but the last 3 weeks, I just feel like I've been the center of my own personal life. I just feel like I've been really inward focused. And last weekend, I was at the Minneapolis airport, and a few minutes before my plane took off, I got a call, and it was that a bestseller list might be interested in putting the book on it, so which is awesome, but it should have been great. But honestly, the moment I heard it, I was just stressed. Miserable is probably a better word. I just started texting friends asking if they'd help spread the word. And so I'm texting and I'm like, why did this have to happen right before I get on the plane? You might just want to be thankful that it happened, buddy, right? But it's like, why did it have to happen right before I get on the plane? I lose reception. So I get on the plane. I'm still texting people. The stewardess walks by and says, hey, sir, would you please put away your phone? And I might not have put away my phone. This is getting more candid by the moment. And so I'm sitting there texting until finally reception at some point will cut off from your phone. If you didn't know that, it will happen. Well, I didn't even realize it, but in the midst of being consumed with myself and my stupid cell phone, I didn't even realize I was sitting right next to a 9-year-old kid. And it was like God showed up and it was just like, hey, Mr. Author, hey, Mr. Important over here, you might want to puts less focus on yourself, and you might want to start focusing on me. And oh, by the way, you might want to focus on the VIP on this plane, the most important person on this plane, this kid sitting right next to you. It's like, hey, Weber, are you there? Like, get out of yourself. Maybe focus on the most important plane. So I said, hey, man, how are you doing? He's like, I'm doing okay. And I'm like, where are you coming from? And he's like, I'm coming from Idaho. What are you doing in Idaho? Just finished a year of boarding school. And I was like, oh, that's great, man. I'm proud of you. I even told him, I said, I feel like I'm sitting by a celebrity right now. And he's like, really? And I was like, I do. That's awesome. And I said, can I ask, like, what you were in boarding school for? No reason if you want to share. And he's like, well, I struggle with ADHD. And I just struggle with being physical with other kids. And I said, like, roughing kids up. And he's like, roughing kids up. His name's Glenn. If you'd pray for him, I'd appreciate it. But just looking at this 9-year-old kid, you could just tell he'd been around the block many more times than I had. Just brokenness just was so evident in his life. And immediately my heart ached for him. It was crazy. The previous 3 weeks, off and on, was totally caught up in myself here and there, focused on myself, on the book, my phone, and whatever else. And honestly, in those bits and pieces of being focused on myself, I was miserable. Spiritually, Paul's so right, I felt like I was dead. But after talking with this kid, I immediately, honestly, sat back in my chair. And the first thing that came out of my soul was, Jesus, I just need you. Not even this kid, me. Like, I just need you. I've been focused on myself, on me, myself, and I, and I've been miserable because of it, and I want to just put you back at the center. Most of this flight, this kid slept. Honestly, might have been awkward. I'm glad he didn't wake up, because I just sat there looking at him and praying for him the entire flight. Just like, God, would you just deliver this kid? Would you give him self-control when he gets back home? Would you just help him? Would you just deliver him? And it was like the very moment that I put my focus on God and on this kid, my day was changed. The moment I put my focus on God, joy and peace and love and goodness began to fill me from the inside out. Once more, those who live a life based on themselves, focus on themselves, and where does it lead to? It leads to death. But hear this, thankfully, there's a second option. There's an option two. Let's pray. Gracious Father, Heavenly King, we come before you today grateful for who you are, needy for who you are. I pray for all of us across our campuses, Lord, if we've gotten off center, out of love, out of kindness, would you just grab a hold of our lives right now? Even jerk it if needed, maybe bring us to our knees. If it's pride that's holding us back, Lord, would you just grab our lives and would you just put us back on center? And maybe we've never had it on center, and so today our prayer is just, God, would you just center me on you? We maybe been following you for a long time, and we look like we're following you, and we actually pride ourselves on how we're following you, and yet we're so off center we don't even see it. God, will you just grab gently our lives and put us back on center? Lord, we're so grateful for you. We're grateful for option 2. We're grateful that when we follow you, when we base our lives on you, it leads to life. Amen.